HealthEd is Australia's leading provider of quality clinical education for doctors and other healthcare professionals. This episode has been made available on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. For free access to the full library of podcasts and to claim CPD for listening, visit healthed.com.au or download the HealthEd app.
My guest today is Professor David Segal, and we'll be exploring the potential for gene therapy in the treatment of a range of genetic conditions, but in particular in Angelman Syndrome, a rare neurogenetic disorder that occurs in 1 in 15,000 live births. Professor Segal is based at the Genome Centre, Biochemistry and Molecular Medicine, Pharmacology and Mind Institute at the University of California, Davis. He's the co-chair of the Integrative Genetics and Genomics Graduate Group and the field chief editor of the journal Frontiers in Genome Editing. Dr. Segal's research focuses on developing molecular therapies for neurological disorders. A flagship project for this group is Angelman Syndrome, for which the therapeutic strategy is to reactivate a silenced gene in the brain. Professor Segal and his co-researchers collaborate with groups around the world to develop genetic therapies for this and for other related disorders. Hello, David, and welcome to today's HealthEd Women's Health Podcast.
Hi, it's very nice to be here. Thank you very much.
David, I have to admit I know very little about gene therapy, so I've really been looking forward to speaking with you today to talk about it, what it involves, and in particular its potential for treating Angelman syndrome. So can I start with the most basic of questions? What is gene therapy, and when did you become interested in the possibilities of such therapies?
Yeah, so gene therapy is really any kind of therapy that works on the level of the DNA, the genetic information in the cells. The most common form of gene therapy that people might think about is if someone has a genetic mutation in one of their genes, maybe there's a possibility to use gene therapy to simply put in a new copy of the gene that doesn't have that mutation anymore. So now that gene will make a healthy protein and hopefully make that person healthy again. So that's the kind of simplest form of gene therapy. When we talk about gene therapy, technically we might call that gene replacement therapy because we replace a mutant gene with a healthy gene.
Sounds like an exciting field. When did you get involved?
Well, I've been very interested in this field for quite some time, more than 20 years, I would say. But for most of my career, gene therapy has always been something that is out there just around the corner. Oh, they've had some setbacks. Oh, they've had some advances. And only recently has gene therapy really become a reality. But today, we do have approved gene therapies.
So what sort of advances have we seen in the last few years?
Yeah, so there has been a lot of technological challenges that had to be overcome before gene therapy could become a reality. The experts like to say that the three biggest challenges are delivery, delivery, and delivery, meaning you can make the healthy copy of the gene, but getting it into the cells where it needs to get inside the body has been a real challenge for the whole field. But with lots of people working on this from around the world, now we're starting to see those efforts pay off. And like I say, I'm very happy to be able to talk to you today and say that gene therapy is now a thing.
David, the other term I came across in my research before speaking with you today is a term called molecular therapy. Is that the same as gene therapy, or are they different?
Well, so molecular therapy could include a few other things like antisense oligonucleotides or siRNA. And these are other types of, I guess you'd say, molecular therapies, and they work in a somewhat different way. They don't actually replace the gene, but they still rely on the DNA and the RNA that's in our cells to overcome the genetic problems that these people would have.
David, how do these sorts of therapies that you're talking about differ from, say, a drug therapy, which I guess most of our listeners would be pretty much across in terms of them treating their patients right now?
Yeah, so drugs are small molecules that usually work on the level of proteins. So they might interact with a receptor or help kill some bacteria or something like that. So the way that they interact with the proteins in the body is a little bit different than, say, someone that has a genetic disease where they have a genetic mutation and we want to fix that mutation. So drugs are great at treating many, many things, but they can't cure a genetic mutation. So for a long time, it wasn't possible to treat genetic disease. But now with these newer approaches, like gene therapy, we've really only had the capability to make real treatments for people, I'd say within the last 5 years.
And David, have any of these gene therapies been actually approved for clinical use so far?
Yes, so that's the most exciting part. So the first gene therapy to be approved in the Western Hemisphere, it was approved in Europe actually in 2012, and that treated a very rare disease that many people have probably never heard of, lipoprotein lipase deficiency.
Hmm.
That's a mouthful.
It is.
But it was the first gene therapy that was ever approved anywhere. The first gene therapy to be approved in the United States was only in 2017, so a few years later, and that treats a rare eye disease. Since then, there's been a flurry of other gene therapies that have gained approval with the US FDA or the European EDA. So now there's about 18 or 19 approved gene therapies. And what I mean by that is that these are not under any kind of clinical trial. These are therapies now that someone that suffers from that disease could come in and get this gene therapy prescribed for them by a doctor, and hopefully will make them better.
David, I understand that some of these therapies may hold some real promise for those with Angelman syndrome. But can I ask you at this point to tell us a little bit more about Angelman syndrome and maybe exactly how the gene therapy might be useful in its treatment?
Sure. So I've been involved in the Angelman syndrome community for a long time. And we and others have been trying to develop molecular therapies and gene therapies for Angelman syndrome. So Angelman syndrome is caused by a mutation in the gene called UB3A. And people that are missing this gene in their brain suffer from a number of different kinds of ailments. One is that they have cognitive deficiencies, and something that happens to a lot of Angelman kids, they never really develop speech, for example, or have a lot of trouble expressing themselves, which can also lead to a lot of behavioral issues. They also have some characteristic movement disorders, and a lot of them will suffer from seizures. So some of them will learn to walk when they're 13. Some of them will be wheelchair bound for the rest of their lives. Some of them will suffer from seizures for a large part of their lives as well. So it's a very debilitating and difficult disorder. Fortunately, it's rare, about 1 in 15,000 births.
This episode is one of hundreds of informative and free clinical podcasts from Health Ed. Access the entire library through the Health Ed app for healthcare professionals, which you can download today from the App Store.
And how might gene therapy be useful, David?
So there's a couple of ways that gene therapy is being used to try to treat Angelman syndrome. One of the ways, like we said, if you have a bad gene, a mutant gene, maybe you could just replace that gene with a healthy copy. And so there are some groups that are trying to go that approach with the gene replacement therapy. There are a couple of other approaches that people are taking too. And so one is to try to turn on a healthy copy of the gene, of this UB3A gene. Instead of the copy that has the mutation, turn on the healthy copy, and that will also make the protein right from the body instead of introducing it with gene therapy. And another one that I would just mention is this antisense oligonucleotide therapy, which I could talk a little bit more about. That one is actually in clinical trial for Angelman syndrome.
David, you were saying delivery is the issue. How do we get these gene changes in there, if you like?
Yeah, so for most of the things that we try to put in the body, we've learned a lot from how nature gets genes put into the body, and that is efficiently done with viruses. So over many years, people have studied, different kinds of viruses and see if we could make them useful to help deliver these genes into the cells. And so now the viral vectors, as they're called, are not like the viruses that we find in the wild that make us sick. They've been kind of re-engineered so they don't carry any of the viral genes. And instead, we've learned how to package our special therapeutic genes into them so that now we can trick them into delivering those genes for us using these viral vectors. And so that's been the way that we have to introduce them.
David, is gene therapy only likely to be useful, say, in young children, or could there possibly be a broader range of conditions that this might be useful for?
That's a really important question. And it seems to depend on the exact kind of disorder that they're working with and what the mutation is doing. So, for example, there might be some diseases that have a late onset, in which case treating children at even at a later age might be beneficial. Some diseases you might have to treat it very early on because the gene that has the mutation in it is active very early on. And so you might have to treat them very early. With respect to Angelman syndrome, since that's a gene that primarily affects the brain, it's thought that we might, have the best benefit if we treat early on. But the brain is very plastic and can do a lot of catch-up learning, let's say.
Hmm.
And so there's a real hope that even treating people later in life might still have an advantage. But that's something that we really won't know until we start treating people.
David, do you know if there are any Australian research teams working on genetic disorders like Angelman's? And do you know if their gene trials may be available in this country?
Well, so there aren't that many groups in Australia that are working on Angelman syndrome per se, but there is a lot of wonderful types of other kinds of therapeutic approaches that people are using in Australia on other kinds of disorders. But from the work that's going on largely in Europe and the United States, there are some therapies for Angelman syndrome that are now in clinical trial, and some of those trials are now going on in Australia as well. And I just want to clarify for your listeners, when we talk about a clinical trial, that means that they're being tried in people.
Hmm.
So that's what the clinical part of that means. And so these are the trials that are being done to make sure that the drugs are safe and effective before they become approved by the regulatory agencies for general use. And so that's the stage that they're in right now. There are no approved therapies for Angelman syndrome at this point, but there are these clinical trials going on where people are treating patients and seeing if they have if it's safe, number one, and then if it's actually improving their condition, number two.
David, can you give us any advice on how we might keep up with the latest developments in this area of treatment? Where do we find out about these clinical trials? Are there any websites or resources that you could recommend to our listeners?
Sure. So there's a website called clinicaltrials.gov that's run out of the United States. And I think it tries to be very comprehensive around the world for clinical trials that are going on. So if there are clinical trials that are registered on that site, even in other countries, going to clinicaltrials.gov, G-O-V,
Hmm.
is a good way to find them. But for people that are affected by someone with a genetic disease, another good source of information is to go to a foundation that supports the patients like this. So in Australia, a good source of information would be the FAST Australia group. FAST in this case stands for Foundation for Angelman Syndrome Therapeutics. And Megan Cross is actually the leader of FAST Australia. And those foundations are always staying on top of the latest developments in the field and can give very good information about that.
David, I'll be sure to put both of those on our Health Ed website so people can access them really easily. David, if you were able to look into the future of gene therapy, where do you see things going? If you had a crystal ball, what will we be looking at?
Yeah, so I'd say there's a few things that we could look forward to. So, as I said before, the three main challenges are still delivery, delivery, and delivery. So, better delivery methods would be a real boost for the entire field. So, right now, we're able to use these viral vectors, and they are very good at doing many things, but they have some shortcomings too. So, there's a lot of interest by a lot of scientists trying to develop better vectors that cause less problems and are able to get bigger packages inside of our bodies and get them to the right cells that need treatment. So I'd say watch that space for future developments. Another thing is instead of trying to replace a mutant gene with a healthy copy of a gene, there's now the ability to think about actually editing the genes that are in our bodies. And this is really only a capability that's also come around very recently. And in fact, there's only one gene editing therapy that's available now as a therapy for sickle cell disease. And that was only approved in December of last year. So just to give you an idea of how new that is.
Mm-hmm.
But the idea that we could not just replace mutant genes, but actually fix them is something that will become more of a reality moving forward into the future.
David, I want to thank you so much for sharing your time and your expertise with us all today on such an important and groundbreaking topic. I do hope we get to speak again. You take care.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening. Visit healthed.com.au to create a free account and claim CPD for podcasts like this and access a record of your learning. Subscribe to the show on Spotify or Apple Podcasts for weekly episodes on a range of clinical areas relevant to your ongoing practice.